interviews in your podcast,
Yes.
for the book, etc. It'd be really interesting to hear a little bit about, kind of, as you think about from a global lens, what are some of the commonalities that you've seen among the remarkable people, but also potentially some of the differences in what made them remarkable?
Well, the commonalities are easy because the commonalities made it into the book. And
Yeah.
at the highest level, the most obvious commonality is that remarkable people go through 3 stages. There's a growth stage where they're acquiring new skills, new interests, new passions. And then there's a grit stage, because after you grow, it takes grit to actually bear fruit. And then finally, I think that truly remarkable people in the world, they go through a phase of graciousness and grace where they realize that they've been fortunate. And so they have a noblesse oblige, they have a success oblige to pay back society. And at the highest level, that's the most common things that I noticed about interviewing 250 remarkable people.
Well, so maybe I'll ask you the hard one then. What do you think are some of the differences, and perhaps with the lens of different geographies, or what?
Well, one difference that I noticed, and I make a statement that remarkable people can hold 2 conflicting thoughts in their brain. Okay, so the biggest, I think, difference is that some people, like Jane Goodall, they fall in love with a category or a subject very early in life. Steve Wolfram is another example. Fell in love with physics very early in his life. And their growth mindset means that they grow along the same curve. It's one thing to like animals as a kid. It's another thing to dedicate the next 80 years of your life to the preservation of species. And that's what Jane Goodall did. So now there's that, like what interests you as a young person, you just keep at it until you're remarkable. Well, the conflicting thought is that many people make absolutely bizarre career changes. So, I went from jewelry to technology. And the example that I cite in my book is Julia Child, who used to work for the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. So basically, Julia Child was a spook until her mid-30s. And then she went to France and fell in love with French cooking. And that's the Julia Child we know, the French chef. And so those are 2 conflicting thoughts. And, when people read, books and they seek advice, they want to hear one answer, right? Should I stick with one thing or should I pivot? And I'm telling you, both have worked.
Yeah, I like that. In your book, you talk about like passion versus interests. And
Yes.
If I take that and I take the kind of grit point, maybe talk a little bit, particularly for founders around the world that are going to be kind of taking an idea and choose to dedicate the next decade of their lives. Like, what advice would you give people as they're choosing the problem that they're going to do in search of being remarkable, in search of building something meaningful?
Well, I would say that at the highest level, you need to come to this realization of that this is not a chicken or egg problem. And in a sense, is it that you make a difference so you're remarkable, or you're remarkable so you make a difference? And I'll tell you, there's a sequence, and the sequence is you make a difference, you do good shit, then people will have no choice but to consider that you are remarkable. So I don't want people to get the impression that this is a self-help book where, I'm teaching you how to put lipstick on a pig and reposition yourself as a visionary thought leader, influencer. I'm telling you, the way to be remarkable is to make a difference. So this book is about how to make a difference. And if you make a difference, then you will be considered remarkable. And I can tell you that Jane Goodall and Steve Jobs, they never ever wake up in the morning and say, "Geez, how can I position myself as a remarkable person?" that kind of conversation that just doesn't happen.
I like that lens. I like that lens a lot. In my book, I talk a little bit about entrepreneurs that cross-pollinate, that have a bunch of different experiences.
Yes.
And it feeds into innovation. I was struck by that similarity in you talking about kind of some of the remarkable people we talked about have taken a bunch of these. Maybe talk a little bit about kind of what you've learned there, and curious for young entrepreneurs, this kind of collection of experiences as a way to find their passion, but they're also the thing they're going to
Yeah, well, I
Right.
think that, earlier in life, your life should be about sampling. And
Mm,
until you have collected enough samples, you really can't decide. And that's why I do not like the concept of, find your passion, because that implies that when you find something, it's instantaneous love and it's instantaneous um, ability to do this, et cetera, et cetera, like it's magic and like it's, a lightning bolt strikes. And I think that sets people up for failure because it sets too high a bar that, oh my God, you're 18 years old, you haven't found your passion in life yet. What's wrong with you? And I'll tell you that I think the better path is you keep a growth mindset, you keep your eyes and ears and mind open, and you see things that interest you. And it might be photography, it might be writing, it might be podcasting, it might be surfing, yeah, it might be cooking. And you just pursue these interests until you decide that it's not for me, or like I really love this. And maybe, knock on wood, some of them develop into passions. But to search for this thing that's instant love and life changing and life focusing, you're setting yourself up for failure. That's too high a bar.
I like that. I also loved your comments in the book around learning surfing later in life, like this idea of sampling but reinventing yourself, giving yourself a chance to have other passions over time, both
Yeah.
professionally and personally.
Well, we go back to Carol Dweck, right? So Carol Dweck has this growth mindset. And I read that book in the early 2000s, and I'll tell you something, it really changed my life. And I took up ice hockey at 44. I took up surfing at 60, and that's about 34 years too late and 50 years too late, respectively. And part of the growth mindset is you have to embrace vulnerability. So I tell you that if you take up ice hockey at 44 or surfing at 60, you have learned to embrace vulnerability because you will get hurt. And so I think that's very important. And it's like a lens into at least Guy's soul that I would take up such things at such a late age.
I love it. Well, as a Canadian, I'm really glad you had a chance to do the hockey. But
What do you mean you were a Canadian? You're no longer
as a Canadian. Although I will tell you, I live in San Francisco now, in the Bay Area for 12 years. And I have grown soft on the weather, so I actually need to get back up to Canada and toughen up a little bit. I think.
Yeah. What city?
Winnipeg, right in the middle.
Ah.
So if you ever want to come check out some hockey in the middle of winter, we could do some.
Listen. Let me tell you something. I went to the first Heritage Classic game,
Yeah.
and it was like 30 or 40 below. Now you might say, was that centigrade or Fahrenheit? And I'll tell you, at 30 or 40 below, it's the same.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
It's the same. And it was in Edmonton, and then so I went to this Heritage Classic. It was a double hitter in this I don't know, football stadium or something. And so the first game was the old timers game, right? And the second game was, I don't know, the Edmonton Oilers against the Vancouver Canucks or something. And we didn't even stay for the second game. Wow. It's still freaking cold, man. We went back to that hotel in Edmonton, the one that's like every room is a different weird theme. And I also went to the Olympics in Vancouver. So, I never met a Canadian I didn't like, Alex.
Oh, there we go. Okay, well, hopefully that will not start today. But it's good. We'll need to get you into Winnipeg next time.
Okay.
Right in the middle. Maybe two other questions just on the book. I think one, since you talked a little bit about kind of the sampling element, I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about what steps you would counsel someone that's like an aspiring founder that they might want to do today, or for founder that might have just sold their company and is thinking about like the next thing. What steps they might take today?
Well,
from the book.
I will tell you that I think there are three very rich paths to figuring out what product or service to create. So one path is that you go and see or you go and be the customer. Yeah. And this would be like Toyota seeing how people use minivans, or I had a friend named Martin Lindstrom, and he was retained by a pharmaceutical company, and they wanted to get closer to the customer. So he made the executive staff breathe through straws so they would understand what it's like to have asthma, right? So if you go and be or go and see, I think it leads to insights for products or services. So that's one path. Second path, and maybe the richest vein, is you build the product that you yourself want to use. So this is Steve Wozniak building an Apple One. This is Mark Zuckerberg building Facebook. So it's not based on a market survey and total addressable market calculation. You just build the product that you want to use, and you just hope you're not the only nutcase that wants to use it. And then the third path is that you alleviate pain and you work backwards from the customer. So, rather than focusing on what you like to do, what you're good at doing, what you've done before, you look at the customer and you deal with the customer's pain and you work backwards from that pain to solve that pain, as opposed to working forward from what you're good at and you like to do. And I think those are the three richest veins to figure out what to do at a conceptual level.
I like that a lot. One of the things I've noticed a lot in innovation today is that there might be a global idea. Increasingly, it comes not just from America, it's coming from India, it's coming from other markets. I'd be curious at the remarkable people that you've seen, how much is coming with like their own original idea and this is the thing they're doing versus kind of like taking puzzle pieces together and then reassembling them. So it's less of a disruption, it's more creating something with a bunch of this.
I mean, I would say that very, very few things are truly, truly uniquely thought of by an entrepreneur. Steve Jobs goes to Xerox PARC and he sees the graphical user interface, right? I mean, and over and over again, like what I've seen is that part of being an entrepreneur is knowing what to steal. Because, you could have gone to Xerox PARC and you could have stolen the wrong thing, right? And so I don't think that you should not be laying awake at night thinking, oh, I'm not the first person to think of this, I shouldn't do this. I mean, that's not working backwards from the customer. The customer doesn't work. I don't think people wake up in the morning saying, I want to buy something that no one has thought of doing before. Okay. I mean, they're trying to solve their pain, so solve their pain. And if you solve their pain of, it's too hard to use this computer. The people at Xerox PARC figured out there's a graphical user interface. Why don't I copy that concept? Hallelujah. I mean, you know what? The hard part is not getting idea. The hard part is implementation. So you go to Xerox PARC, you see the user interface, and then you think, oh, I'm going to build a computer with a user interface. And I'm going to get software companies to write software. I'm going to get distribution. I'm going to get service. I'm going to get support. I'm going to get a brand awareness. Every one of those things is hard. The idea, graphical user interface computer, that's easy. Yeah. That's easy. It's the implementation that's hard.
Yeah, I buy that and 100% agree. You've been early on a bunch of these trends, right? Like obviously with Apple, you're involved with the Wikimedia Foundation. Maybe talk a little bit about not the last kind of couple of decades, but like as you're thinking about the next couple of decades of technology reinventing itself. Like what gets you most excited today? Where should people be looking?
Listen, this is a theoretical question. I don't think merits much intellectual attention because I mean if you to use an absolutely example at hand right now, 1 year ago, how many of us were saying, oh, the future is AI with LLMs, that's going to be generational artificial intelligence, and it's going to be helping us write ad copy. It's going to help us kids write, essays. It's going to be our research assistant. It's going to replace photography. I just have to go someplace and say, I need a picture of a person standing by a river with an apple in his mouth, holding a bow and arrow, right?
What everyone needs, obviously.
Now, I don't, right. Who among us predicted that? Nobody. So that's only a year ago. So you're asking me to do something in the next 2 decades. Listen, if somebody says they know what's going to happen in the next 2 decades, I suggest you ignore that person. That person is delusional. Maybe I can tell you what's happening in the next 2 weeks, but not the next 2 decades. Certainly not a year.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you one question because it was in the list of questions suggested, which is how did you use
out?
Well, and you mentioned AI. How did you use AI in writing this book?
I use AI a lot. I think of AI as a research assistant with infinite knowledge, infinite patience, basically for free or $20 a month. And it never judges you. It never tells you you're a dumbass for asking that question. It just, it's just like there. And I mean, to go back to the example I cited before of Julia Child, when I needed an example of someone who made a really big career change, I went to ChatGPT and I said, give me 5 or 6 examples of people who made big career changes. And he says, oh, Jeff Bezos, he was in finance and he went into, schlepping books. But Jane Goodall was a spook and became a chef. And I said, I never knew that. I thought, I kind of assumed that she was born French and, she grew up with a French chef father or French chef mother, and it was in her DNA to be a chef. And then I found out she used to be a spook. So that example would have never gotten into my book. I also use AI to summarize chapters because I needed summaries of chapters, and I would put the whole section into the ChatGPT and say, give me a 3-sentence summary of this section, which is very useful. It's like fresh eyes on what you just did. I use Quillbot to check my grammar and to tighten up my writing. And, some writers may hide the fact that they use ChatGPT or they use AI. And I have the quite opposite opinion. So in my theory of writing, when readers want the most useful book they can get. And if ChatGPT and all these LLMs have helped me write a better book, so be it. That's what I owe my readers. And I'll use a cooking analogy since we're talking about Julia Child. When you walk into a restaurant, you want a great meal. You don't go into the back of the kitchen and say, oh, you're using a food processor, you're using a microwave, you're using an electric knife. I don't want any of those things. I want you to just use I want you to use one knife, and I want you to be using a wood burning stove. And I don't want any of these electrical, microwave, food processing, Cuisinart. That's cheating. Not at all. All you care about is the food, right? So that's my attitude towards AI. I think AI has made me 2 or 3 times a better writer.
I love it. Well, and if it helps you summarize, as Mark Twain once said, if I had more time, I'd write a shorter letter. Here, it helps you do that pretty efficiently. So that's cool.
All right.
Last question.
Yes.
Here's the question I should have asked you about the book or some of your findings, and what do you think about it?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
What is one question I should have asked you about how to be remarkable? That really cuts to the inside.
You should have asked me what motivated you to write the book.
Oh, I like that.
Okay. And here's the answer. A really big advance.